Today I woke up with fresh pita bread on my mind. You see, it's got this flavour and texture that no store-bought pita can possibly compete with. It's soft and fluffy, and trust me, the freshly baked flavour adds a whole new dimension to whatever food you pair it with. This recipe is deceptively easy and will make some of the best pita bread of your life.
Hey everyone, I'm Obi, a home cook who wants to get you cooking authentic and delicious Middle Eastern food at home. So today I'm going to show you how to make a staple of Middle Eastern cuisine, the Arabian pita bread. These are eaten throughout much of the Middle East and they're perfect for making sandwiches with. We'll be using these pittas in a few weeks for our long-awaited Egyptian falafel video, so make sure you're subscribed and turn your notifications on so you can watch it. Now I'll show you how to make the pita dough from scratch, then we'll discuss the cooking technique, and finally we'll give it a taste test. Let's jump right in and make it.
We'll start off by measuring all the ingredients for the dough. To do that, I'm using my trusty precision kitchen scale. I'll be measuring everything in grams and I'll leave the imperial measurements in the description box. This kitchen scale is able to accurately measure up to 10 kilograms on the big scale and 200 grams on the small one. By using a precise scale, I can ensure that I nail the right hydration so the dough is easy to work with and it rises properly. I'll leave a link to this one and another good scale in the description box, and I'd highly recommend you get one if you bake often. First up is the salt, and we'll need 8 grams of it for this recipe. I'm using regular table salt here, and if you want to use sea or kosher salt, I'd recommend finely grinding it. Next is the yeast, and you'll need 7.5 grams of either dry active or instant yeast. If you want to use fresh yeast instead, you'll need about 18 to 19 grams. Next is the sugar, and we'll be using 13 grams here. This will help feed the yeast and will sweeten the dough ever so slightly. Following that, we'll measure out 20 grams of olive oil. I'm using extra virgin olive oil here, but use whatever oil you have on hand. For liquids, we'll be using both water and milk in this recipe. I'm measuring out 85 grams of milk, which is about 82 milliliters. The milk will make the pittas softer and give them some nice browning when baked. Zero your scale once more and then add in 85 grams or 85 milliliters of water. This will bring our total liquid weight up to 170 grams and our flour hydration to 57%. The result will be a dough that is pretty easy to work with and not sticky. The final thing we'll weigh is our flour. I'm using 300 grams of all-purpose flour here. Some people add in 20% of that as whole wheat flour, which can give the pita a nice appearance and nuttier flavour. In total, this recipe will make 6 80-gram pittas. I've tripled the recipe for the sake of this video and will be making 18 of them. To start putting the dough together, we'll first bloom the yeast to check that it's alive. Because I live in London, I've taken the jug of milk and water and warmed it up slightly in the microwave. You want to make sure your liquids are about room temperature and no hotter than 45 Celsius, as heat can kill the yeast. Add the sugar to the warmed milk and water and add in the yeast as well. Mix it all together very thoroughly using a whisk or fork until you have a yeasty liquid that looks like this. Set it aside on the counter for about 10 to 15 minutes, and when the time is up you should have something that looks like this. That foamy layer on top of the liquid shows that the yeast is alive and working, so we can use it for the recipe. If yours doesn't do this, you'll have to buy some new yeast as it's probably dead. To make the dough, I'm using my stand mixer with the dough hook attachment, though you can definitely do this by hand as well. Add in the flour to the mixer as well as the salt, then mix the two together briefly to get the salt evenly distributed. After mixing together for about 20 seconds, make a well in the flour and add in the yeasty liquid. If you're doing this by hand, I recommend using a bowl for this part. Add the olive oil to the bowl as well, and then you're ready to mix it into a dough. If you're using a mixer, start off on the lowest setting, otherwise you'll cover the kitchen in flour and yeasty liquid. The aim here is to form the flour and liquid into a dough ball. My mixer isn't doing a great job at that part, so I stopped it and manually combined them using a spatula. Then it was back to kneading with the mixer until it came together into a ball. This took about 2 minutes to form and will take about 4 minutes by hand. Once it had come together into a ball, you can see it has this really rough and shaggy texture. As we knead it more, that will smoothen out. If you're doing this by hand, pour the dough out onto a floured worktop and knead it using the palms of your hand. Using the mixer, you'll need to knead the dough for about 8 minutes on low speed, or about 13 minutes by hand. You'll know you're done kneading when the dough has a soft and smooth surface and a slight stickiness to it. When you touch the dough, it should leave a small trace in your hand but not cling to it. At this point, you should lightly flour your worktop and pour out the dough. Use your hands to form the dough into a ball by cupping the underside and rotating it. Once it's ball shaped, take a large bowl and lightly oil it before adding in your dough. Rotate the dough a couple of times to make sure it's well coated in oil so it doesn't stick to the bowl. Your dough needs room to double in size, so I split my dough in half and placed it in 2 bowls, then covered them in plastic wrap. You'll need to leave the dough to rest in a warm place for a full hour, and it should grow to at least double its size. After the hour is up, here's what my dough looked like, and you can see how soft it is. You can now knock the air out of it, then apply a dusting of flour to your worktop. Pour the dough out of the bowl, then begin forming it into a rectangular shape. Now you'll split the dough into 6 equal 80-gram pieces. I'm doing 9 because this is half the dough and I tripled the recipe, which should give me 18 pieces in total. With the dough split up into portions, we'll now weigh them to get a uniform size for our dough balls. Take each piece and then add or remove dough to get it to exactly 80 grams. Just to note, 80 grams is perfect for 7-inch pittas. I'd recommend removing 10 grams for every inch smaller it gets. So if you're doing 6-inch pittas, you should split the dough into 7 70-gram portions and 8 60-gram portions for 5 inches. Then you grab each portion and roll it into a ball using your hands. To get a smooth surface, stretch the sides of the ball downwards and tuck them into the underside of the ball. When you've balled up all the portions, give them a brief dusting of flour and cover with a kitchen towel until you're ready to roll them. To roll the dough, just flatten a single ball on your worktop and dust it with flour. Then use a rolling pin to stretch it into an oval. To stop the dough climbing onto your rolling pin, only roll outwards from the centre rather than back and forwards. Once you've got it to the desired size in one direction, turn it 90 degrees and roll it out the other way. I'm by no means perfect at making circular dough, but this technique gets you a decent shape most of the time. The end result you want is dough about 2mm or 1/8 of an inch thick. When your dough looks like this, pull it off the worktop slowly and set it to the side, covering it as well with a kitchen towel. Once you've rolled out the dough, it needs to rise for about 20 to 30 minutes before cooking. I learnt an important lesson here. If you're working with a large amount of dough like me, roll the dough out in batches while the rest cooks, otherwise some of the bread will overproof and fail to inflate when cooked. While the pittas are proofing, we can discuss the different ways of cooking them. The first way is baking them in the oven, and if you have a pizza steel or stone, they will turn out perfectly. If you don't have one like me, you can use any oven tray, which you'll need to place in the oven upside down. Make sure this is clean though, as we'll be cooking the pitta directly on the surface. Crank your oven up to its hottest temperature and close the doors so it can fully preheat. The other way of cooking the pitta is on the stove. You basically preheat a pan, then flip the pitta every 30 to 45 seconds until it puffs up. I wasn't a fan of the final appearance on these pittas, and it was a bit too involved, so I'd recommend using the oven method if you can. When the 30 minutes are up, you'll notice the dough is significantly chubbier and has inflated well. All that gas will help the pittas puff up in the oven or pan. Take a pitta and toss it onto your preheated oven tray. This needs to cook until it puffs up and the edges start browning. In my oven at 240 Celsius or 460 Fahrenheit, that took 3 minutes and 30 seconds. I'd recommend setting a timer for this and removing as soon as they are done. Here's what you want yours to look like: browned around the edges and then an underside with a small amount of browning. If you want, you can flip them over in the oven, but I think it's unnecessary and it can hinder the inflation. Obviously, the hotter your oven, the quicker these will cook, so play around with the timing if your oven can go hotter. Once cooked, you should stack your pittas on a plate or tray and cover them with a kitchen towel for 15 minutes. This will allow them to steam and soften. Now obviously not every pitta will inflate fully, but the good news is you should still be able to pull the two sides apart rather easily. As you can see with this pitta, it softens up immensely after resting and can be easily torn apart and opened. Once I was done baking, I had a large stack of pitta. These will keep good for 4 days in an airtight container, or you can freeze them and they reheat great in the microwave.
So here's our freshly baked pita bread. Now if you follow the instructions, you should get a puff on each one. You can see just how well the layers separated and the fluffy texture inside. Now let's taste it. The flavour of the freshly baked bread is just so delicious, and the texture is perfect. These will be great for any sort of saucy sandwich like shawarma, liver or sausages, and they're just right for the falafel we're making soon. Give them a try and I guarantee you'll love them. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like or comment, and if you make this, send me some photos. Thanks to our Patreon sponsors for making this video possible. If you're interested in joining them, the link is in the description box with the full recipe and directions. And I'll be back next week with another recipe.